Hello, everybody, and welcome to Behind the Scenes podcast for Out of Frame. I'm your host, Sean Malone, creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education and creator of Out of Frame, a series on YouTube where we explore the intersection of art, culture, and big ideas. We're not in studio today. I'm here with Paul Nelson, our Out of Frame Shorts editor, and of course, our social media director at FEE, and then Jen Mafasanti, who is the communications director at the Libertas Institute in Utah. We are not in the studio, Paul and I anyway, are not in the studio today because we wanted to do a special episode all about the Snyder Cut. And so we're going to get into all of that, all of our thoughts. In fact, Jen and Paul and I haven't really had a chance to actually talk this through yet. So a lot of our conversation is going to be completely off the cuff, and I don't know what everybody's reactions were. I have an inkling of Paul's. I think I don't think I have any's for Jen's. But before we get into that, how are you guys doing after your 4-hour extravaganza? Also, take note. Initially, I watched it twice, so I'm on the 8 hours of the Snyder Cut at this point. But Paul, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm recovering from my 4 hours. I have seen the light of day since then. So, all is well.
Good. Jen?
I'm also doing well. I had to split my 4 hours over 2 different days because the Snyder Cut's an R-rated flick, I'm not going to sit down and watch that while the boys are awake,
Yep.
So that was just for me and the husband after the kids went to bed. And unless you just want to stay up ridiculously late, there's not a whole lot of time after bedtime to watch movies.
I made a pretty big deal out of this. My mother-in-law's, basically living with us at the moment. And, and I made a big deal to my wife and my mother-in-law prior to, even like the week before or whatever. And I was like, all right, you guys clear your schedule because we are on Thursday or whatever, when the Snyder Cut drops, we're doing it. And, and my mother-in-law was like, well, you better bring good snacks. So I got a whole bunch of wings, and I got her a cheesesteak, and we got good food, brought it all. And then at like 6:30 or whatever, we started watching this thing. And that was our whole evening. That was that first evening. And then I went back the next day and watched it again because I figured I was going to do an Out of Frame episode on it, and I wanted to start pulling notes and clips and finding time codes and all that kind of stuff. So in all reality, my second viewing of the Snyder Cut probably took me closer to 6 hours because I kept having to stop, pause, transcribe something, pull time codes and go back, a little bit and watch it again or whatever. So I've spent a lot of time with this movie at this point. Plus I'd spent a decent amount of time with the original Justice League. So had you guys you'd both seen the first iteration of the Justice League? Oh, of course, because we talked about it. So we watched that for that. It's different. It's quite a bit different, actually. So I don't know. I guess let's just jump into it. So actually, before we jump into it, I'm just going to say flat out, there's going to be spoilers. There's a whole lot of this movie that's totally new. The plot is very similar to the first movie or the first, version of this movie. I mean, in essence. But there's so much new material that it's pretty much impossible not to spoil it. Even if we're talking just about setup, we're not going to spoil the conclusion. I mean, obviously it plays out very similarly to the original cuts. Steppenwolf is going for mother boxes. He gets the mother boxes, and then the Justice League has to battle and defeat him before he, uses the mother boxes to destroy the world. I mean, that's basically still the plot of this movie. It was the plot of the first movie. Not much I can do about that. But that said, every step of the way, there are huge differences in the way that Snyder put this together versus Joss Whedon and the army of studio executives that I'm sure got their say on the first version. So with that said, let's start with some first impressions. Paul, why don't you give me your initial thoughts, and also what were your expectations going in?
So, as a relative newcomer to the DCEU, I have not enjoyed really any of these movies, even the Wonder Woman stuff. I mean, they're fine. I actually kind of hate the Man of Steel with how they portrayed Superman, and then the Justice League 2017 was just terrible. It is bad.
Yeah.
So my expectations for this were, it's going to be long. That was my only expectation. I wasn't high on the idea that this was suddenly going to be a good movie, that that Zack Snyder was going to be able to come back and make something that was cohesive and coherent and make you actually care about these characters. But having said all that, he has proven me wrong. He surprised me. This 4-hour, 6-part movie, miniseries, whatever we want to call it,
Yeah,
really actually made me care about character outside. I still don't care about Superman. I completely ruined Superman. But everyone else, Cyborg, I think is my favorite of what they character in this expanded universe. Actually has some backstory now.
Yeah,
he actually has a moment and multiple moments. He is the key Justice Leaguer. I don't know what to call him. He's not an Avenger, obviously, but he's a Justice Leaguer who saves the day, and he is a hero. He gives up things to save the day, and but there are some things. This 4-hour movie could definitely be 3.5 hours.
Yeah,
they could have cut out the Lois and slow-mo getting coffee. That was a choice.
We should
could have
probably
been in regular
talk.
time.
I don't have a plan for how exactly to structure this, but I would say we should probably talk about some of the things that I think didn't need to be in the movie. I think there are a lot of things that got added to this movie that, and Paul, I will agree with you entirely. I think that this really, for me, it was a huge improvement over the first iteration. I've made no secret of my sort of feelings about all of this kind of stuff. I wrote a review of Batman versus Superman called, despite some cool moments, Batman versus Superman is a disjointed mess, which it was. But like by the time we got to Justice League, it was a really complete disaster. I mean, like there were so many things that were just blatant plot holes, things that were cut, things that didn't make any sense. And just generally things that weren't set up. And of course, characters, Flash and Cyborg in particular, maybe Cyborg most of all, who just got completely ruined, really. I mean, not even ruined, just like they didn't get any kind of a treatment that was respectful or what they would deserve if you wanted to actually introduce them as real characters. Heck, even Aquaman barely got any character introduction in that first iteration of this movie. And it was all sacrificed in favor of things that were really kind of bad. They were very Joss Whedon-y quips and jokes and things like that like made me hate Flash. I mean, it certainly made me hate Ezra Miller's portrayal of Flash. And I don't think it was Ezra Miller's fault, but he was doing a whole bunch of stuff that, was kind of jokey and quippy that didn't make any sense. And then at the same time, he didn't really contribute anything to the story. And I think similar to Cyborg in this movie, he actually has some major contributions to make. He also, I feel something for him. Like he's a character that I actually kind of care about now. And without all of the Joss Whedon quips, he doesn't seem so annoying to me anymore, which is great. Yeah. So we can get into all that in a bit, but to your point, Paul, I think there are some very, very big, in literally entire scenes that I would probably still cut, or just don't do them in slow motion, like the coffee thing. you don't, that didn't need to be slow motion. Like if you're going to use a technique like that, let it be something that stands out and that really matters to accentuate a particular plot point or a particular emotion. But Lois Lane just going to get coffee and walking down the street, like, why? Why? That scene was, 6 minutes. It could have been 30 seconds or a minute, and it would have been just as good. And you would have saved yourself a chunk of the runtime. And there's a whole bunch of cases like that I think we should probably talk about at some point. But Jen, initial thoughts.
I agree that there were a lot of parts of this movie that were unnecessary or unnecessarily slow. Like there's a Sklar Brothers bit where they are big sports fans and they really enjoy watching bad sports and making fun of it. And there's this one thing that they do when athletes are just going slow and they just chant slower, slower, slower. And there were so many times where I just did that during this movie, just because why are you tracking your feet here? But I didn't make the movie, so there you go. But I do think from a strictly plot standpoint, this makes so much more sense than the theatrical version. We actually were told like what the parademons are and where they came from, instead of just, hey, look, bugs,
monsters,
gotta punch them,
gotta
punch the bugs. So
I think
saved that. That's good.
I think that part of this is really, really important. I think people, sometimes studio executives especially, I think, have this, and I've heard it, and Paul, I'm sure you've heard it too over the years, where people will say, like, executives or people who you're working for as clients will say, like, well, this needs to be a minute long, or I've been told that, like, short videos are going to do better than long videos or whatever. And the same kind of thinking, pervades the movie industry to some extent, where it's like, well, we've got to get the movie down to 2 hours. And I think that was sort of the mandate for Joss Whedon. But what you should be saying is we've got to get the story, we've got to tell the story as effectively and efficiently as possible. So it doesn't necessarily have to be 2 hours. In this case, it doesn't really have to be 4 hours either. This version isn't as efficient as possible either, I would argue. However, I would also just say that, like, the goal shouldn't be an arbitrary time, And so if the movie if you're cutting out pieces of the plot, if you're cutting out important character building moments, if you're cutting out setup that you need to pay off at the end of the film, don't cut that stuff out. Let it be a longer movie. And that's what we kind of ended up with here. Now, we, of course, also ended up with some scenes we didn't need, but at the same time, boy, setting up the parademons, I think, is important. Setting up the history of Darkseid coming to Earth and losing, I think, is super important. Again, there's going to be lots of spoilers in here. I think setting up and this may be the most important of all, to be honest, is setting up what the mother boxes actually are and what they do, telling us that they are change machines. I love the way that Cyborg expressed this. He said they're change machines. They don't care about labels like alive or dead. They just convert matter to a different form, whatever form the user wants. And so if it's, going back and it will, what do you say, reinstate the former relationships between atoms, which is an amazing thing, but it's also the reason that we know and that actually makes sense from a plot standpoint, from a story standpoint, why this thing would work to resurrect Superman. Because otherwise, it's just kind of weird magic box, But now that we actually have some context for what it does, I now understand why they would even have that idea in the first place. Whereas in the first iteration of this movie, I had no idea. It was just, oh, we could just do this thing with this magic box. Well, how do you know, Batman? That doesn't make any sense. Like, why would he know that?
Because he's rich.
Because he's rich, of course. No, I mean that's the thing. Like having cyber, and of course the reason that we know that is because we got character story about Cyborg, you know. And if we didn't know Cyborg's connection to the box, if we didn't know that he had these sort of technological abilities and that he could communicate with machines, all of these things, it just becomes a plot hole. But if you bring him back in, suddenly these things that were plot holes in the original version become fully fleshed out, important beats that carry through the rest of the film and help us set up everything else. And that's, that's like the greatest improvement you could make to a movie like this. I was really impressed with that part of it. But of course, yeah, I mean, I also had to be treated to 5 minutes of Icelandic singing for no actual reason.
And sweater sniffing.
Sweater sniffing. Very
Sweater
weird
sniffing,
choice.
yeah.
That's the thing. Like stuff like that where you go. So there's a quote. I'm going to butcher the quote because I'm not going to pull it up at the moment. But like there's a David Mamet quote about writing, and he talks about what every scene needs to have. He said 3 things basically every scene needs to have, or needs to explain for an audience. It needs to explain who the character is, what they want, and what will happen if they don't get what they want, right? And that's the purpose of a scene, basically. Advance some piece of knowledge about the character and their goals, their motivations, right? Zack Snyder is really good, it turns out, at adding those things back into this story. I learned a lot more about the characters and who they were. I learned a lot more about what they wanted, and that includes Steppenwolf, by the way, which I think is really important. And I got to know what would happen to them and to everybody else if they didn't get what they want. The problem is, quite a lot of the time, after we've learned all of that stuff, Snyder just keeps the scene going. So it's like that Aquaman scene. Aquaman literally leaves the scene. He jumps into the ocean and he swims away. And yet we are stuck in that scene for another 3.5 minutes as Batman awkwardly stands there while a bunch of ladies sing in Icelandic. Just like, the scene's over. Like, let's go. Let's move on at this point. So there are some weird choices.
Yeah, that was completely unnecessary. And believe me, I'm as big a Jason Momoa fan as any other
But
person.
he wasn't in the scene anymore. He swam away.
But he wasn't there, and I'm not going to sniff his sweater. Come on.
Yeah, a little strange. Plus, you don't know where that sweater's been. He probably just pulled it off of like a fisherman. So
that's gross.
I actually, by the way, I do have a question about that, because in almost every scene, Aquaman is either shown putting on or taking off an article of clothing. Where does he get them from? Like he leaves. Well, yeah, I mean, it has to, because he just left it on the. Like, he took off the sweater and left it on the beach, and then he swam into the ocean. So, okay, like where did he get it from in the first place? He obviously wasn't swimming around with it before. I don't know. It's confusing to me. It's maybe an unexplained part of Aquaman's powers is to automatically generate some article of clothing when he arrives on land.
Well, this was definitely, thinking back through the multiple scenes and all these things and the length, this felt more like a video game with a bunch of cutscenes than a movie. It just felt like a lot of cutscenes put together. And I know that sounds like a negative thing, but I don't really view it as that. The only reason why I say that is there aren't any scenes where, especially Marvel does this really well. Mm-hmm. There aren't any scenes that show these heroes really not being heroes. And that it's just one thing after another, and it's one thing next level, next stage. Yeah. We got to do this, got to hide this box, which isn't a bad thing. I don't, this comes across as a negative, but it's definitely doesn't have any room to breathe.
Yeah,
even though it's 4 hours long.
Well, that's the thing. I think it would have room to. This is the thing about some of these things that you could cut, and thinking about it's particularly. I think it's particularly bad in the first hour, and in that first act, really, of the film. I think there's so much stuff in there that feels like it's cuttable. Um, there are only a couple moments that feel like the movie takes a little bit to breathe. One of them is the introduction of the Flash and the scene that he has with Iris, but then that doesn't actually stick around for very long. Like he doesn't actually talk to her at the end of that moment. And another one I think that stands out is when Superman actually returns to life and then has a moment with Lois and his mom. And actually, maybe even the moment where he goes into the Fortress of Solitude as well. I think both those things are the closest this movie takes to those kinds of things. But what we don't get, are, to your point, we don't get anything that's like the MCU sort of farmhouse scene in Age of Ultron. There's nothing where it's just like or even in at the beginning of that movie where they're just hanging out at a party. There's nothing like that in this movie. It is go go go, pretty much the entire time. But also these are kind of gods, I mean, these are huge, huge characters that aren't really human in the same way that a lot of MCU characters are.
So I think that's one thing where the DCEU kind of loses me in comparison to Marvel, is that every single one of these characters are just so overpowered, Superman being the prime example. But there is nothing grounding them to any sort of reality. And at least in the Marvel universe, even though you have these superhuman super soldiers, you know what their limits are, and they have very defined limits of what they can do and what they can't do. And that actually adds stakes to the fight. With the in fight, Superman's going to show up, and he's Superman. What is he going to do? He's going to do Superman things.
So this is a thing for me. The Superman thing at the end. I've talked to a bunch of people. In fact, one of my Facebook friends messaged me like right after he saw the movie, like early in the day on Thursday too, which is like, that's a bold move to be like, hey, have you seen this? And I'm like, it's 5 p.m. I've not even gotten close to getting here. But he asked me if I thought that Superman was overpowered in this context. And it's a weird one because, like, all right, again, to just get right to the end of the film here. But like Superman flies in and lands in front of Steppenwolf just as he's about to, hit Cyborg with an axe. And the axe does absolutely nothing. I mean, this axe has destroyed Atlantis. It destroyed Themyscira. It sliced tons and tons of Amazons in half. Like, it's a brutal weapon, right? And it just whacked Superman on the shoulder, and he didn't even feel it. Literally looks up at him and says, "I am not impressed." But here's the thing: at the same time, and this maybe this is unfair. Maybe this doesn't really change the overpowered nature of this. I mean, if you also understand Superman, what Superman is, right, and what he had just done. The black suit for Superman is a sun absorbing suit. Like, that's the point of the suit. And the man went right up to space and bathed in sunlight before going to see Steppenwolf. He was juiced, man. Like, he was totally jacked at that moment. So, I mean, like, that's what's going to happen, right? Now, Snyder didn't need to write it that way or whatever, but like at the same time, like if you're using Superman and you're going to juice him up, you're going to put him in the battery suit and he's going to go up into space and soak up a bunch of solar radiation. He's going to be powerful.
And that makes sense, but they don't explain that in the movie whatsoever.
It's just true. They don't really.
If you know Superman, the character, like you do very well, then that would make sense. But in the movie, it just, he's back from the dead. He's goth now. He has skewed his bright red, white, and blue suit, and he's grieving.
That's one thing about Superman that did bother me is at the end, sort of the epilogue part where Superman opens the shirt in classic Clark Kent fashion, and it's not the blue and red suit, that seemed like an error to me. Like, to have him still in the black suit then seemed like a weird thing to do, because he's, at that point I should feel like he's back, like he's actual Superman, he's back, and the black suit is not, it's not for that. But yeah, you're right. He didn't really explain that. It is kind of goth Superman at that point.
Yeah, there were a number of details in this film that seemed like they were put in specifically for super fans, and that if you're not like deep into this universe, just anyway, you're not gonna get it. Like, you're not gonna get the reference to Robin dying at the very end.
Oh yeah.
You're not going to get the reference to the black Superman suit. You're not going to get the reference. You're not going to understand why Flash is able to run that fast and alter time or anything like that. That just kind of comes completely out of left field. We had to pause the movie so that I could explain that to my husband. Be like, that's just something that Flash can do, man. Like,
so that let's talk.
Snyder did not invent that.
Let's talk about Flash for a second, because I do think that was a little bit of a weird choice. And one of the things my wife had a little bit of an issue with, which I kind of agree with, is that Flash in this is like the youngest character, or maybe Victor is, but they're probably about the same age, right? They're both probably 18, 19 years old, maybe a little bit older. I don't know if Vic was Vic in college, or is he playing college football? Or is he playing high school?
In college.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So let's say they're both in college. Let's say they're both like 21, 22, whatever. So fine. But like, Flash should be pretty new at a lot of this stuff. And he kind of gets treated as the younger guy on the team. And he kind of has that attitude. Also, Victor doesn't have that attitude. He's got a much older kind of demeanor and everything. But that said, like, it's okay at the beginning of the movie, but he's the one who gets injured the most. He trips. He makes some kind of dumb moves where he doesn't, like, he runs into people, or he does some things that are kind of clumsy or whatever. Which, first of all, I never think of Flash as being a clumsy character, because he really can't be. Like, how if you can see everything in slow motion, like, it's pretty easy to avoid stairs, for example, right? Like, you're not going to trip on a rock that you saw coming from, miles and miles away. But that said, that's where I think that there's some disjointedness, because if he's going to be a little bit of a newer, like, if he's a newcomer to his powers and he's somebody who trips over stuff periodically and he makes some dumb moves, then being at the power level at the end seems a little out of place. Like, if he was, perfectly capable with his powers in every other instance, then I'd go, okay, he's ramping up, and yeah, he can run, faster than the speed of light, which is crazy, crazy, crazy idea, right? But it is weird when he didn't, he was kind of treated as like a little bit clumsy in other contexts.
Yeah, there was when he met Bruce Wayne, Bruce was sitting in his second favorite chair in the Flash's lair, but the Flash had a pretty sweet pad, and I was under the impression that he was some poor kid that was, and he already had a suit that was made out of material that protects the space shuttle on reentry. Where did he get all this stuff?
Yep. Well, that opens some doors. I mean, look, so one of the things I'd like to get into is the kind of the morality of all of this, because I think this is all right. So there's a whole bunch of stuff that I'm writing about for the Out of Frame that I'm going to do on, and I haven't recorded this one yet. So we're recording this podcast before I've actually finished writing or recording the Out of Frame episode I'm going to do on this same subject. But the thing that I'm really focused on right now is a lot of the moral aspects of not only being a hero, but also like what does it mean to be a hero, which I've talked about on the series before. But also, like, what are the ethical implications of having the kind of powers that these guys have? I mean, I think it's so easy, and they handle this so well, I think, with Cyborg, but I think this is also a question with Flash. And I think it's always a question with Superman. But in particular, like with Cyborg, they actually just directly get into it. I mean, there's a whole montage where Silas Stone, Victor's dad, is explaining how much power he has and how much control he's going to have over literally anything technological in nature, which affects most of our lives at this point. So the question, as Silas puts it, or the challenge, as he says, is not going to be whether or not it's possible to do something that he wants to do. The question and the challenge is going to be whether or not you should. And so Victor's choice, which I think the movie handles really well overall, is to ask that question of himself, right? What if now that you have these powers, what are you going to do with them? And what are your limits? You know, what shouldn't you do with them? And I think that there are some really big questions that kind of go unanswered in that realm, especially with Flash, because time travel is a big power to have, and has a lot of implications. So
it's the implication. That's a little Always Sunny reference. But so is Cyborg, he has the power of the Federal Reserve. That's what I understand, correct?
Yes, I believe he does. He can print money on command. So that was an interesting scene, actually. So this I talked about on a podcast earlier. And Jen, I know you have a lot to say about the Flash. Let's talk about Cyborg for a second first. Like, there's a scene in this movie where, in the context of that montage, where Cyborg sees a woman as a kid, and it's raining, and she's trying to get some money out of her bank account at an ATM, and she's got insufficient funds for what she wants to do. And he kind of looks over at her and then drops $100,000 into her bank account. Now, it's a cleverly handled scene, I think, in a lot of ways. I especially like that he kind of made it like a bank prize. Basically said, you've won our bank's, like, you know, most valued customer award or whatever, and here's $100,000, which is whatever, fine. It's unclear whether or not he pulled that money from another account. It doesn't look like it, though. What it looks like is he literally just creates, because he pulls like a stack of money, sort of in visualizing space, and pulls a stack of money and just adds it to her account, which is, that's a Federal Reserve move. So I'm a little conflicted because he's creating inflation. At the same time, when the Federal Reserve does it, all that benefit tends to go to the biggest banks in the world. And in this case, he was giving some benefit to a woman who had no money, which I have some sympathy for. But at the same time, it's like, it's not actually, for me anyway, because understanding all of that kind of stuff the way that I do, it's not actually a very heroic move. It's actually kind of a shady move to do. But, you know, it looks nice. And then I was watching Dan Murrell, formerly of Screen Junkies. I was watching his video on this, and he cited that exact scene as a scene that shows you how good of a person Cyborg is. So I think the way that audiences are going to perceive it is this is Cyborg being a good guy. But he's also, like, you know, he's messing with the financial system in a way that actually will cause harm to other people. It's just spread out over a lot of people. So I don't know. It's a weird choice. But Jen,
yeah,
let's talk about the Flash.
Okay. So what I think that most people, when they create these incredibly powerful characters and they give them the ability to do like reality altering things, bringing people back from the dead, altering time, that sort of thing, they don't necessarily consider all of the moral implications along with that. And they should, because when you suddenly find that you have this ability, you have this power to bring back someone from the dead, like Superman, or to go back in time and alter events to a better outcome.
Yeah.
You know, the more you do that kind of thing, the more you tend to do that kind of thing. It is like any kind of power. The more you wield it, the more you want to wield it. And
Sure.
you're not just bending reality, you're bending yourself. And the more you bend, the more you become bent. And that
Hmm.
is a very, very slippery slope until you're coming up with flimsier and flimsier justifications to exercise this power. Um, in the case of this film, these are very, very good reasons to exercise this power. We bringing Superman back from the dead so that they can actually win against a world-ending power like
Yeah.
invasion. That's a
Yeah.
good reason.
Hmm.
But what's the next reason going to be? Is it going to be that good?
Right.
You know?
Well, and Flash, so Flash's thing too is, I think, similarly, I think the justification is sort of easy. He's only going back 30 seconds or so, you know. He's not he's not changing the past, right? He is technically, but he's changing literally the last minute in time is basically it. Let's just roll that back, get there, do this thing, And that's sort of defensible in that sense. But that said, the movie getting into the epilogue and the whole nightmare sequence where Batman is with he's with the Joker and he's with Deathstroke and Mara, and I forget if there's anybody else in that scene. But so basically, this is alternate universe Batman in a world where Superman is now an evil figure. Basically, Darkseid won on that world, and then Superman is now the ruler of the debris or whatever. But in that's actually sort of a reference, and again, going to the point of things that you wouldn't necessarily get unless you were familiar with the comics. But that's kind of a reference to the Flashpoint paradox storyline, wherein Flash goes back in time decades and saves his mom's life. Because part of Flash's backstory, and they actually do get into it in this movie, which is great, is that his mother was killed, his mother was murdered, and his dad was framed for that murder. And so a lot of Barry's motivation for becoming a crime fighter in general, not only as a superhero, but also in his day job as a forensic analyst, forensic analysis, I'm saying, but a lot of his motivation for that is to free his dad from being wrongfully accused of his mother's murder, right? And I think that's a really noble end. But then when you get into the thing of, okay, well, Barry figures out that he can time travel, so his first move is, I'm going to go save my mom because that's important to me, and that's the one thing that I would alter if I could alter the past. And then it creates this alternate timeline that's a hellscape, that's this horrible thing. So I think that the movie is, for better or worse, like it's setting that up a little bit with the epilogue. Now, frankly, I think it's worse. I think that epilogue should have mostly not happened at all. The epilogue added a whole bunch of stuff that I think I would have cut. And actually, in particular, I would have cut that scene. I think I would have kept I would have kept all of the stuff that sort of wraps up everybody's individual story. Barry showing his dad that he got a job in a crime lab, I think was a great little moment. I think, Cyborg actually smiling and feeling good about himself. I think that was a great moment. Even the Superman stuff I think was good. And we haven't even talked about it yet at all, but Martian Manhunter introducing himself to Bruce Wayne, I think I'm pretty happy with as well. But I'd have cut that nightmare scene entirely. I don't think that it added anything. And unless they're going to actually do that movie, then what are we doing here? DC's playing with fire on that one. And I don't know if this version of the Justice League is enough to revitalize the universe. I have no idea,
But then we get into questions of which movie is the canon movie.
Yeah, I mean, that's going to be the problem. So the MCU is going this direction too, right? Like the MCU is kind of going into this multiverse realm, and literally the Doctor Strange 2 is the multiverse of madness, right? Which is who knows? It has all kinds of weird effects once you get into that territory. It's a very comic booky thing to do because both DC and Marvel have long histories of multiverse, storylines. And you kind of have to do that. It's an interesting sort of, it's sort of like an odd solution that was made to a problem that comics have, where you have over the course of a long period of time, a lot of different writers telling a lot of different stories. And there's just no way to coordinate all of them together into one singular plot. Like you're just never going to have a situation in comics where 20 different writers over a 15-year period tell stories that don't clash massively in terms of like backstory and plot lines, and you're just going to have all these holes stack up at some point. And the way that both Marvel and DC have figured out how to get around that is by just saying this one happened in this universe, that story happened in this universe. And periodically, very famously for DC in like Crisis on Infinite Earths, and again with Flashpoint Paradox, you actually have ways that these comic book companies have merged their storylines or pared down the complexity of their stories in a way that's actually canon in the overall company's narrative, which is kind of hilarious. I mean, it's really amazing kind of thing to have to do. It's such a bizarre thing in comics that you can literally like tell a story that justifies slashing half of your line, right? And say like, we've got way too many Superman books. This one is the one that is true. And we're going to devalue all of the other ones by literally like erasing them from space-time, basically. A pretty crazy thing that you got to do. But I think that that's kind of where the Snyderverse is going, if it is in fact going anywhere. Which, what do you guys think about that? Do you think that this is going to save the DCEU? Do you think that they can continue from this point?
I mean, yeah, they definitely could. I think this has generated enough buzz, probably enough new activations for HBO Max to justify at least looking at it.
Yeah.
Do I want them to? I don't know. There's enough interesting things that they could probably do it, but their track record on making good movies is not very long. It's just they've been really bad. So it's hard for me to get excited about, oh, it's a Martian Manhunter movie. Okay, whatever. While on the other hand, we'll probably talk about this later in the Patreon supporters section. But on the other hand, Marvel's over here making me care about Falcon. Dude has a jetpack, and now I care. It's just the differences between the two is just astounding. So your point about the comic books makes sense with all the different writers and all that stuff, but this is such a different medium, and the release structure is just it's just more time, in between movies, obviously.
So I mean, it's not like you've got 20 books happening in a year. You have one story that you're telling in a year. So it's not that hard to keep a single thread as canonical, right? You can make the movie universe be a universe, right? But then just keep it in that world, right? And that's honestly, that's what I would prefer. But I would also prefer that the Superman wasn't dark and brooding, because Superman shouldn't be that as a character, I will say I really appreciated the added scenes and actually the reshoots, because we haven't said this either. They got rid of the stupid mustache thing in this. That's actually just a win all by itself, is to not see a badly CG'd mustache removal on Henry Cavill's face. But
yeah, I never expected to be deep in the uncanny valley over someone's upper lip, but there I was.
It's so weird, so weird. But the good thing to me, like the fact that they added a little bit more time for him to recover. He got resurrected, And in the original cut of the Justice League, basically he gets resurrected. He has a fight with the other Justice League members, which, by the way, I also like the fight more in this version as well. It's a lot better in a lot of ways. And also I want to talk about Lois Lane for a second, because again, with this cut, Snyder's actually establishing things that have payoffs in a way that we didn't get before. So, for example, Lois Lane is like somehow Batman's big guns. It's a dumb Joss Whedon kind of joke. But in this version, Lois Lane is actually going to that park every day. So it's not weird for her to be there. It's something that she would normally be doing. She was on her way there. We see it. They set it up. And then when she sees that Superman is floating above the park, she moves there faster, So her arriving when she did was actually well set up. And that gets to the other thing I was going to say, which is that, like, taking the time, in the original version, Superman just had that fight and then he's gone. He zips away with Lois, and they have a brief moment, and then he's out of the movie essentially entirely until the final battle with Steppenwolf. And he just comes back and he's kind of Deus Ex Machina out of nowhere. But in this, he has time to reflect. He has time to spend with Lois alone. He has time to spend with his mom and Lois and kind of hang out on the farm for a minute. He then goes to the Fortress of Solitude, spends some time reflecting on the words of his fathers, which I think are actually, that scene I really liked as well. I think you had a melding of his father's messages to him, which I think was really pretty good and powerful. And then we actually see him then go visit Alfred, which was if you guys recall, was in the trailer, one of the original trailers for the first version of Justice League. They cut that. It was in the trailer of Alfred saying something like, "Oh, I was wondering when you'd arrive. Just hope you're not too late," or something to that effect. That was in one of the original trailers. But bringing that back is also important because that's how Superman would know where everybody was. It's how he would know where to go and what was going on with the rest of the Justice League and what their plans were. So all of those things, I think, made a pretty big difference to the movie. And especially, like, gave Superman a minute to return to himself, which you need. Otherwise, again, it's just plot holes. It's just stuff that just happens magically, and people teleport from one place to another, and we don't know why they went or what they knew, or it's just too weird in the original version. As a result, it's just bad cuts. So yeah, I don't know. I think that's pretty important. What were you guys' thoughts on, generally speaking, like Aquaman? This is another thing I want to talk about on the Out of Frame episode, is Aquaman not wanting to join the team at first, and the conversation he has with Batman about the strongest fights alone or whatever, which is like a thing I've never heard before. I've never heard the strongest man is strongest alone, or whatever he said. It's just like, it's a weird choice. But one of the things I want to talk about in the Out of Frame episode I'm writing is on this idea of individualism and sort of the mythology that people have, that it's if you're an individualist, you have to be isolated, or you reject like human connection in some kind of way. And I think that we kind of see that with Aquaman, or at least that's kind of what it feels like they're setting up with Aquaman, is he's off by himself and he rejects any kind of connection to anybody else. But of course, I don't think it's true that individualists, A, have to reject human connection, and B, that the strongest is in fact strongest alone most of the time. So thoughts on any of that?
Yeah, that was a weird sort of take for Aquaman to have, I think. I mean, I kind of get it from a character standpoint. This is a guy who is half human, half Atlantean. It's made clear that he believes his mother abandoned him and then ran off to go gallivanting in Atlantis to just go be queen, and everything is sparkles and rainbows. at leaving him to just be an outsider who doesn't really fit in the human world for his whole life. And so I can see how he'd have this fear of rejection, a fear of being willing to open up to other people and having that kind of shared experience and all that good stuff. He's always been doing this alone his whole life. But the stereotype of the rugged individualist who is just completely self-sufficient and is strongest on his own and doesn't need anybody for anything ever is patently false. Like, the world is so interconnected. We do, in fact, live in a society. All right, I'm gonna say it. I said what I said. And
we live. Thanks, Joker. We live in a society.
So we're constantly interacting with other people all the time, whether that is in real life, face to face, or if it's like this, over the internet, or even just, paying for something that you're buying at the drive-through. I mean, we're constantly interacting not only with other people, but with the product of those people's efforts. And we cannot escape that, nor should we try to escape that. That's not healthy. It's not fun.
I think, our FEE's founder, I should say our anymore, because you're not part of our organization. You're isolated, Jen. You're separate from everybody. But no, look, so FEE's founder, Leonard Reed, wrote, we've talked about this a million times, but wrote this wonderful essay called I, Pencil, which has since been turned into a book, and we publish it and we'll send it out to you. And by the way, if you want it, you can go, check it out. You just go to fee.org and search for I, Pencil. You'll find the ebook version, and you should read it. It's not very long. It's very, very well written, and it's wonderful. And what it's about fundamentally is the idea that every single, even the simplest of things, something as simple, at least as we conceive of it, as a pencil, is the product of potentially millions of people coming together in various capacities. So you've got people who actually produce the final product, and they're people that you probably don't know and have never met, but they're also all the people who mine the metal and log the wood and get the graphite and form those things into constituent parts. And even from there, there's the people that they rely on to produce their machinery and their systems and and bring them food so that everybody can have lunch at work and everything else. And this is a deeply, deeply interconnected thing. But it's all organized spontaneously. And it's one of the most magical, interesting, amazing things about humanity. And it's not in conflict with individualism at all. In fact, I would argue that individualism is the very thing that makes that kind of possible, because all of those people in the best iterations of anything are doing what they're doing voluntarily. Nobody is forcing them to, log some wood or mine some metal, or, this is not what we want in society. What we want is that every individual person has the moral authority to say for themselves what part of any commercial process they will participate in, whether it be, producing a pencil or, producing the computer that we're talking through right now. I mean, all of that stuff is wildly complex. And for the most part, it happens spontaneously, and increasingly what we would advocate and want to see is for a world where it all happens voluntarily, where there's no one who has to be forced into participating in a group or forced into, achieving the ends of some despot or dictator or whatever, which is sort of the thing that I really want to talk about too, because it's exactly what Darkseid wants, right? Darkseid's ultimate goal is to have an army, a universe filled with people, parademons essentially, who do nothing but obey his every command. It is the complete antithesis of this individualist idea that I'm talking about. Go conquer a world and turn all of that world's inhabitants into mindless drones that the ruler of these worlds, get to decide exactly what they do. That to me is the is the antithesis of individualism, and it's why individualism is so important to me. I think it's really important. But Paul, what are your what are your final thoughts on this movie?
Well, that was all really beautifully put. My thoughts on, at least on Aquaman, and then I'll get into my final thoughts are. So Bruce Wayne says, "We need you on the team," and the entire time I'm thinking, well, why? You're fighting in landlocked Russia. Why? What? And then what are his powers? He can jump, I guess, really high and take a punch. I don't know how that's established anywhere, because earlier in the movie, Atlanteans are just getting sliced in half, but Aquaman's not. It makes no sense.
He's more powerful than they are for reasons.
For reasons.
Because
So
he's Aquaman.
I didn't get that. Aquaman, the movie was, you could take it or leave it. His character, you could take it or leave it. It just, I did not care about it. Will he or won't he? The whole time I'm thinking, I don't, just go get somebody else. Literally anyone else. Batman's already there. You could literally just get a normal dude and say, hey, let's go to Russia and fight some parademons. All right. But the movie in general. So I feel like I've been kind of dogging on this the entire time. And I kind of surprised myself that I am, but I enjoyed it. It was much better than all the other DCEU movies. I think it's probably up there. It's not a high bar, but it cleared that bar for me. My expectations were low, but it exceeded them. I think where DC actually is better than Marvel is, and maybe Sean, you'll disagree with this or agree, but I think their music is far superior and much more memorable than anything Marvel has done.
I kind of hated the music choices in this version, but I will say I think Zimmer and Junkie XL's overall work for Man of Steel and for Wonder Woman and all the things that they brought into this, it is really good. And it would have been nice if it was not interrupted by Zack Snyder's terrible jukebox choices. Like, if we got rid of those things and kept the actual score, I would agree with you. But my gosh, Zack Snyder really, he wants to include, now it's not even Leonard Cohen just doing Leonard Cohen. Now it's even like worse covers of Leonard Cohen songs. And it's like, I could have done without that. But yeah, I agree. The score is, overall, in the DCEU in general, I would say is pretty good. Memorable, certainly.
And then the other thing, we haven't touched on this yet, but 4x3.
Interesting choice.
I understand that this was, he planned this for IMAX, obviously, mm-hmm. But we have progressed.
Well, Paul, you're 4x3
society
right now.
I feel uncomfortable. I feel like I'm in a box. What do I do with my hands? You can't see what I'm doing with my hands right now. You can't even see it. If you're watching on YouTube, you would see that you can't even see it, my hands, because we're in 4x3 boxes. So you just lose something. And while you kind of get used to it and the 4x3 just kind of bashes you into compliance, it was a weird choice for me.
I agree. I also thought it was a weird choice. I think, not to be super pedantic about it, but you're actually losing. I mean, in reality, you're losing more in the widescreen treatment, because if you do shoot something in IMAX, and a lot of this movie was shot in IMAX, what you gain from the IMAX frame is vertical, right? And so what you end up doing when you're cropping a movie, you're actually compressing the screen vertically. So you've got this huge, huge frame, and then it actually does really well in the tall, IMAX screens. If you actually have a true IMAX screen, you'll see it. But then what happens is usually filmmakers, cut that down for like a 1:8:5 ratio, or even from like a 2:3:5 kind of ratio, like really long CinemaScope kind of ratio. And in fact, what you are losing is the vertical space. You're not really losing anything in the horizontal space, because that's actually the edge of the frame, period. So nothing is actually being cropped. It's just you've gained the height. That said, that's that's pretty weird choice when you're going to release it on TV. And in fact, most of the time when you see that happen, so, Christopher Nolan, for example, shoots stuff in IMAX all the time. And when you go to the theater, you get the tall frame, right? If you go see it in IMAX, you'll get the tall frame. But when they actually release it on Blu-ray or when they release it for streaming, then you get a cropped version that is, fit for your TV. I just feel like I can make arguments on both sides. And I will say that it was a little weird and it was jarring at first, but I did get used to it.
You get used to it. For me, it felt like it cheapened the final product just because of seeing it on TV and
the viewing experience. Yeah.
The viewing experience. And this was, I think you probably heard this comparison, but I would agree with this. This was less of a superhero movie and more in the mold of Lord of the Rings, epic, sprawling, world jumping things. And
also the flashback to Darkseid on Earth thousands of years ago, battling humans, Atlanteans, and Amazons in a context where they're wearing like spiky crowns and stuff. That was pure Lord of the Rings. It was exactly Lord of the Rings.
I also want to say
there's some Green Lanterns in it and some gods, which was kind of crazy.
What I found interesting is that the three mother boxes, we held up our end of the bargain until the very end.
Sure did.
And that's the surprising part. And we're just burying it in the ground.
I was surprised by that too, actually, because I really, again, kind of going the Lord of the Rings direction. You think like it's going to be elves and dwarves who take the rings that they are given and they're fine with them. And then it's the humans who are like, undone by all of these things. And always it's the humans who are bad. And in this case, everybody tried. Everybody did their best. And it just happened to be the case that humans buried it in a nondescript way. And that was probably the best move they could have done because everybody else had them in these really like fancy tombs that were apparently pretty obvious for Steppenwolf to go attack. So
yeah.
So who knows?
And the man had them theirs in a closet, so it all works out.
Yep. No, I agree. I enjoyed this movie a heck of a lot more than I thought as well. My expectations weren't particularly high. I think I told you this prior to going to watch it. My best hope really was that it felt like a coherent artistic vision and not like a studio mashup from a whole bunch of different executives and a director that really didn't fit the tone at all. And it was that. I mean, it was Zack Snyder's vision, and I got that right away, which I think that alone was probably worth the watch. But the fact that it added so much that was so essential to the story and to developing the characters and developing the plot and actually setting up the third act in a way that made me actually care and understand what was going on. That especially, I mean, I was not really expecting it to have that powerful an impact on the story. And it really did. So I'm really glad that Warner Brothers allowed him to do it. And it cost like $70 million, by the way. This was not a cheap undertaking for Warner Brothers. And I mean, it's a testament to fans. And, also I'm going to give a shout out to Mercedes-Benz as well.
Yeah. I'm sure they paid for a good chunk of that $70 million.
But yeah, I mean, that's my feeling. I mean, look, I get it. It's not going to be for everybody. It's 4 hours long. It's a big chunk of your life that you're gonna have to invest in watching this. And if you're not really into it, then I kind of get it. But for me, it was largely redeeming for a DC universe that's really fumbled a whole lot up until this point. So I watched it again so that I could, take quotes and write down notes and stuff so I could do this episode. And I did not feel bad about it. I didn't feel like, oh gosh, this is awful. I enjoyed the rewatch, in fact. So that's that's about as high praise as I can give on, especially something like this that like has no business, barely any business existing, let alone being any good. Jen, final thoughts.
Yeah, I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. Which is not to say that I enjoyed it a lot, but I enjoyed it. It was okay. It was fine. I wish it were tighter.
Yeah.
The writing. I wish it were a bit more efficient and economical in its storytelling. But if you get a chance to make the movie that you always wanted, throw in the extra bits. Go for it. Why not?
You know what
Mercedes is paying for it.
I will weirdly say in defense of the way that this movie was made. Are you guys aware of the dwarved cut of the Hobbit movies? Are you familiar with this at all? So,
No.
Peter Jackson's Hobbit movies have tons of stuff that shouldn't be in them. That have tons of terrible stuff in them as well, but also a bunch of story points that had nothing to do with the Hobbit story, and really was like Peter Jackson trying to connect it to the Lord of the Rings. And of course, for what really feels like just studio greed purposes, they split, what was a 250-page book into 3-hour movies, which doesn't make any sense at all. So somebody, some enterprising internet denizen, decided that they would take the initiative to recut all of the Hobbit movies only into the parts that were from the book, and just to tell the book story. Now, you can't quite do that because Peter Jackson made some major changes to characters and things like that didn't quite work. But I've seen the latest, or the most recent, and this is years ago, but the most recent iteration of that cut. I don't think it was ever actually fully finished, but it was a cool endeavor. And here's what I want, why I bring this up, is because I think with Snyder's Justice League, all of the things that I really didn't like about the movie, I actually sincerely believe I could cut out without losing anything else. Because the problem with the movie is that it's stretched too long. Not that now, which the problem with the first movie was that it didn't make any sense. Now everything makes sense. There's just too much of some things. So you could pretty easily, if you had a mind to, go in, cut out all the bits that you don't need, speed up Lois getting coffee. Like, there are all kinds of stuff that you can do to bring this down to like a manageable 3 hours and 20 minutes or so. And I think you wouldn't lose anything from the story. So I think this is actually a case where you could take exactly what was there, just do one more editing pass, just be a little more brutal about the things that don't need to be there, and you'd have a really, really tight, excellent movie without making any plot changes, which frankly makes me wonder why they didn't do that in the first place. But here we are. So with that in mind, we were originally thinking about doing a Patreon bonus episode where we talk about Falcon and the Winter Soldier, first thoughts on the pilot episode of that show. We're kind of running out of time, though, and I think we should just end it here, actually, and then maybe after, or as we get a little bit farther into the season of Falcon and Winter Soldier, I think we'll do that. So forgive me for those of you guys who follow us on and support us on Patreon and Subscribestar. That's patreon.com/OutOfFrameShow and subscribestar.com/OutOfFrameShow. You can see that in the sidebar right on your screen if you're watching us on YouTube. My apologies, we're not going to do a bonus section this episode, but we will see you in the Discord. Discord is still growing tremendously and fast, and I'm really excited to talk to people in there whenever we can. And, I've said this before, I'll say it again. We've got the green room for supporters of the show, and I'd love to see you guys use that more, and I'd love to be spending more time in there. And if you're not yet a supporter of the show, please consider joining us on Discord anyway. I'm in the general, and we're going to talk wherever, interesting conversations are happening. And then, of course, follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, maybe TikTok. But Paul, anything you want to add? Am I forgetting any social channels that we have as we keep expanding them into the
that is the Out of Frame expanded universe at this moment. We might do a multiverse at some point. There might be branching timelines and videos coming soon. Wink, wink, maybe.
Maybe. Oh, teaser. All right, guys. Thank you so much for watching or listening. We'll see you next time.